A faint hiss escapes Silas's cracked oxygen filter as he trudges across the endless desert plain. The sky above is a molten swirl of purples and reds, and every gust of wind pelts him with fine, stinging grit. His hair, usually brushed up from his brow, now clings to his forehead in damp streaks, and a scar along his cheek is reddened by the planet's relentless sun. He stops every few steps to study the geological scanner strapped to his arm. Occasionally, he hums a half-remembered lullaby, trying to calm the twist of dread in his stomach. His ship crashed 2 days ago, lured in by rumors of a rare mineral deposit that might have saved him from total financial ruin. Now, the only hope is to push forward until he finds any kind of shelter or sign of something that can lead him to the deposit, and a means off this forsaken rock. His scanner emits a steady pulse, and at last it picks up a metallic anomaly ahead. He forces himself to keep moving. When he reaches the source, it's a hunk of debris, presumably from another vessel that met a grim fate. Silas kneels to pry away a panel, hoping to salvage a battery or circuit board to boost his failing gear. That's when he hears a soft footstep behind him. He spins, one hand near the blaster at his belt. His hazel eye narrows, while the green-tinted implant in his other eye adjusts to the glaring sunlight. Standing there is a figure with indigo skin so startlingly luminous, it seems almost pearlescent in the daylight. Long white hair, braided in delicate patterns, cascades over slender shoulders. Golden eyes flecked with violet lock onto him in cautious fascination. For a split second, the world around them seems to still. Silas doesn't know whether to draw his weapon or speak. The figure, clearly alien though humanoid in shape, slowly raises both hands, palms out in a gesture that seems intentionally peaceful. "I sense someone was hurt," she says, voice melodic but edged with concern. "I heard your distress signal echo through the sands." He realizes she must be referring to the beacon he managed to activate shortly after the crash. Still, it's surprising anyone found him. "You're the first person I've seen," he manages, his throat raw from thirst. "I'm Silas Morrow, I need help." She seems to regard him for a moment as though trying to feel the sincerity in his words. "I'm Kuria Vanu," she replies. "I have a safe space nearby. Are you harmed?" He hesitates. The notion of trusting a stranger doesn't come easily, not after all the deals turned sour in his life. But her empathic gaze catches the subtle tremor in his stance. "I twisted my leg in the crash," he admits, "and my filters are almost shot." Kuria steps forward. Her ridged cheekbones emphasize her wary curiosity. "Let me see." She doesn't wait for permission, gently touching a device on her wrist. A faint glow emanates, scanning him for injuries. Her proximity sets him on edge. Her presence is so different, so unguarded, it breaks through the walls he's built. "You'll need water," she says softly, "and a place to rest. Follow me, unless you want to wait for the storm." She gestures to the horizon where dark purple clouds swirl ominously. Silas can't deny the logic. With a final glance at the debris, he steps forward. She leads him across a broken stretch of terrain where hoodoo-like rock columns tower overhead. Her strides are sure and graceful, and he notices that the silver patterns on her arms shimmer whenever she touches nearby stone. It's as though the planet itself responds to her presence. They reach an outcropping that hides the entrance to a narrow corridor of rock. It looks too small to be safe, but Kuria squeezes through and Silas follows. Inside, the temperature drops and bioluminescent vines glow faintly across the walls. Kuria murmurs something in her native tongue, placing a hand against the stone. The vines brighten, revealing a chamber with a natural pool at its center. "Water," she says simply. "You can drink from here, but be mindful. This place is old and doesn't like too much disturbance." Silas kneels by the pool, relief washing over him. He cups the cool water, sipping it with quiet gratitude before filling a small canister. The taste is slightly mineral-rich but safe enough. Meanwhile, Courier rummages through a woven pack, retrieving a small container. She dabs a greenish salve on Silas's injured leg. Immediately, there's a tingle of relief. "Thank you," he whispers, meeting her gaze. She gives him a faint nod, but there's caution in her eyes. "I'm traveling alone," she explains. "I protect certain resources. This place has its secrets, and not all who come here have good intentions." Her voice grows soft. "Why did you come?" He contemplates lying but decides against it. "I'm a surveyor," he says. "I'm looking for a mineral rumored to exist here. It might help me rebuild my business. But the rumor didn't mention pirates or the planet being this dangerous." Couria's expression darkens. "You haven't seen the militia yet," Silas straightens. "Militia," she nods gravely. "They landed months ago, hoping to exploit the resources my ancestors safeguarded. They've taken control of the only off-world port. No one leaves now without their approval. And they don't grant permission." Her empathic sense, he realizes, must be picking up his dread. A hint of uneasy alliance hovers between them. He needs her knowledge of the terrain, she might need his technology. He glances at his scanner, thinking about how it can detect subterranean deposits. "Maybe," he says carefully, "I can still find a small vein and get what I need without drawing attention. I just want to get off this rock." Courier watches him, reading more in his expression than he intends. "If you really wish to survive," she murmurs, "we'll need to work together. My people's bond is strong, and I can't walk away if the militia threatens everything I hold dear." She lowers her gaze. "There's a place deeper in these caves where we can wait out the storm, but you must promise not to betray my trust." His heart pounds. He wonders if she can sense the flicker of regret in him, memories of past failures that taught him to rely on no one. But there's something compelling in Courier's stance, a quiet strength that he can't ignore. At length he nods. "All right," he says, voice tight with old wounds. "Lead the way." She turns and he follows, hoping this choice won't become another regret. As they move deeper, the vines glow brighter, as if the cave itself recognizes her presence. A low rumble of thunder echoes outside, sealing them together for now. And though he'd never admit it, the thought of her calm voice guiding him forward sparks a strange sense of comfort he hasn't felt in years. They press on beneath the harsh light of the twin suns, following the winding trail of tracks in the sand. Each mile brings them closer to the outpost they hope to reach before the militia can claim it. Occasionally, they spot dust plumes in the distance, patrols, perhaps, and they duck behind jagged rocks or slip into shallow ravines until the danger passes. The terrain grows more treacherous as they near a region of sandstone spires, their tops sculpted into impossible shapes by the wind. Silas braces a hand against one of the towering pillars, scanning the horizon with his battered scope. Behind him, Courier rests a palm on the stone, letting her senses drift through its resonant energy. She murmurs to him, "I can feel movement ahead, at least 2 vehicles, maybe more." He adjusts the focus on his scope and confirms what she says. Faint silhouettes of armored transports cresting a dune in the distance. He lowers the scope, swallowing hard. "We're outnumbered if it comes to a direct fight." They shuffle back into a small gully, panting in the heat. Courier rummages in her pack, finding a few more nutrient bars. They share a quick, silent snack, saving their strength. Silas checks his geological scanner, verifying the route to the outpost. "If we skirt around these spires, there should be a pass that leads to higher ground." He notices Courier's brow knit with concern. "What is it?" he asks. She closes her eyes for a moment. "They're moving fast. We need to hurry if we want that transmitter." They push on. The path grows steeper, the sand giving way to solid rock. Beads of sweat trickle down Silas's face, mingling with the grit that clings to his scar. Courier seems tireless, her white hair glinting each time she turns to check on him. Though he moves a bit slower, Silas forces himself to keep up, determined not to be dead weight. At a sharp bend, they hear the telltale rumble of engines. Immediately, they flatten against the rock, hearts hammering. A militia convoy rumbles below, 4 vehicles, each bristling with weapon turrets. Couria's breath catches. Silas feels her trembling slightly, not in fear for herself, but with dread at what the militia might do. He places a hand on her shoulder without thinking, trying to still her. She glances at him, surprise flickering in her golden eyes, and then she nods. Together, they wait until the roar of engines fades. Once the convoy is out of sight, they climb a ridge to peer after it. The transports continue west, away from the outpost. With a whispered prayer to the fates, they dart out from their hiding place and forge onward. Time blurs as they navigate ravines and precarious ledges. At one point, Silas nearly loses his footing on loose scree, sliding several meters. Coria lunges, gripping his jacket, straining to pull him back. He can feel her unnatural strength. Her lithe form disguises a surprising power. She gasps as she hauls him to safer ground, her breath shallow from the near accident. He sees genuine fear in her eyes, and it twists something deep inside him. "I'm okay," he manages, voice hoarse. She nods, but her hand remains on his for a moment longer than necessary. They resume the climb, carefully testing each foothold until the path widens into a plateau overlooking the old outpost. From their vantage, the structure seems half buried in the rocky terrain. Broken towers and rusted walls betray an era when this facility might have thrived. Now it's silent, battered by years of neglect. A tangle of scrap and metal plating litters the perimeter. Silas spots a toppled comms dish near one of the collapsed roofs. "That's it," he says quietly. "We just need to get inside, see if the transmitter core still works." They descend into the outskirts of the ruined base, weaving around rusted beams and collapsed walkways. Couria's heightened awareness keeps them alert for any militia guards, but for now the area seems abandoned. The air feels stale, almost charged with tension, as if the ghosts of its past linger in the dust. At a large sliding door stuck halfway open, Silas ducks underneath, scanning the interior with a handheld light. Exposed wiring dangles from the ceiling. "Watch your step," he warns softly, shining the beam around the floor. In the next chamber, they find a row of dormant consoles coated in dust. Courier remains by the doorway, listening carefully. Silas kneels by the control panel, wiping away grime to reveal a half-broken display. "Power's gone," he mutters. "We might be able to jury-rig something." He opens a maintenance hatch, fiddling with wires, his mismatched eyes narrowing in concentration. Coria steps closer, curiosity piqued. "Let me help," she offers. She draws out a small vial containing a bioluminescent fluid. "Sometimes we can use this as a catalyst if the system isn't completely fried." Together, they splice cables, bridging connections, praying the ancient machinery still has some life. After several tense minutes, a dim light flickers across the console. A feeble hum vibrates through the panel, but the transmitter remains offline. "We're missing a key part," Silas says, voice laced with frustration. "A power converter or an auxiliary battery." He curses under his breath, rapping his knuckles against the metal in mounting irritation. Before he can vent further, Couria's head snaps up, her posture rigid. "They're close," she hisses. Silas hears it too, muffled footsteps crunching on debris. 3 or 4 men, by the sound of it, may be armed. Panic settles over him like a lead weight. They have no time to fix the transmitter. "Over here," Coria whispers, beckoning him behind a collapsed section of wall. They crouch together in the shadows, hearts pounding. The footsteps grow louder, accompanied by voices. Peering through a gap, Silas glimpses a small militia squad in mismatched uniforms, rifles slung over their shoulders. One with a stern face and scarred brow scans the area with a handheld sensor. "We heard power draw," he says in a clipped tone. "Spread out. Whoever's here might have valuable intel." Silas clenches his fists. "If they're found, it'll be a fight they likely can't win outright." Courier closes her eyes as if focusing. He remembers she can sense emotion. The tension thrums in the air, thick as thunderclouds. The squad fans out. One soldier heads for the console they just powered up, exclaiming in surprise when he sees the faint glow. Another approaches the wall behind which they hide. Silas holds his breath, and Courier's hand tightens on his forearm. He can feel her trembling again, but there's a certain resolve in her grip as well. They exchange a silent look. If it comes to violence, they'll have no choice but to fight or flee, and the outcome is anything but certain. Silas tries to stay calm, but his heartbeat slams in his chest, the old lullaby echoing faintly in his mind. Just as the soldier nears their hiding spot, an urgent crackle comes from the man's communicator. "We've got movement on the east perimeter. Check it out now." The guard hesitates, then gestures for his squad to move out. "We'll come back," the leader growls, waving them all off. Within seconds, they file away, footsteps receding. Silas and Courier remain motionless until they're sure the coast is clear. Then they release a collective breath. "We need that part," Silas whispers, swallowing his adrenaline. "If we can't call for help, we're trapped. I doubt they'll stay away for long." Courier seems lost in thought, processing what might happen next. "We might find what we need in a storage section," she offers. "But it's risky." He nods grimly. "We don't have a choice. If we don't at least try, we'll be hunted down eventually." They creep deeper into the outpost's shadowed corridors, hearts still hammering, hope and desperation driving them onward. Dust drifts through the corridors in ghostly clouds, disturbed only by their cautious footsteps. A tangle of exposed wiring and broken panels lines each passage, making every turn feel claustrophobic. At intervals, ancient emergency lights flicker like dying embers, casting their shadows onto the walls in distorted shapes. Silas's pulse thrums in his ears. He grips his scanner, hoping it can locate any energy signatures that might indicate a salvaged battery or converter. Courier lingers close, her keen senses alert to distant footsteps or the subtle hum of equipment. Now and then, she pauses to rest a hand on the corroded walls, her silver marbling glowing faintly as she gauges the emotional charge of the environment. Each time, she shakes her head and urges Silas forward. Something about this place unsettles her deeply. Perhaps it's the memory of what happened here long ago, or the awareness that armed men lurk just out of sight. They round a corner and enter a chamber that might have once served as a storage bay. Racks of dented metal containers and half-smashed crates sprawl across the floor in disarray. Silas steps over broken planks, scanning for a power source. Courier kneels beside a toppled crate, prying off its lid, revealing a heap of rusted spare parts tangled in old cables. She glances back at Silas with a flicker of hope. "Check if any of this is usable," she whispers. He sifts through the mess. Most items are corroded beyond recognition. Finally, he lifts a small cylindrical device, brushing away a layer of grime. The label is almost gone, but the shape resembles a portable power cell. "This could be what we need," he says under his breath. Courier nods. "Let's see if we can find a converter to bridge it to the transmitter." Together, they rummage in the other crates, tension mounting each time a distant clang echoes in the halls. Eventually, Silas unearths a battered converter housing with intact connections. "We might actually pull this off," he murmurs, allowing himself a cautious smile. They both freeze at the soft crunch of debris behind them. Silas tucks the converter under his arm, while Courier rises to her feet, scanning the darkness with narrowed eyes. Muffled voices resonate somewhere near the entrance to the storage bay. Without a word, they slip behind a damaged shelving unit, pressing themselves against cold metal. Silas tries to still his breathing, mindful of how his rapid heartbeat makes his chest quake. Courier leans close enough that he can feel the faint warmth of her body. She looks at him, and even in the dimness he senses her worry for him as much as herself. Two militia scouts enter the chamber. Their flashlights sweep over the clutter, illuminating dust motes and twisted scraps. One of them curses, shoving a broken crate aside. "We know someone was here," the first says, voice echoing off the walls. "Keep looking." They move slowly among the wreckage, rifles held at the ready. Silas's grip tightens on the converter so hard it hurts, but he fears any movement might give them away. Couria's hand slides over his, steadying him. He meets her gaze, and in that fraught moment, something in her expression shifts. Concern, yes, but also a fierce protectiveness. She closes her eyes, lips parting as she focuses her empathic ability. Silas feels a gentle ripple pass through the air, like a barely perceptible hum that stirs the hairs at the back of his neck. He senses her channeling an emotional decoy of sorts, sending out a subtle wave meant to draw the scouts away. Sure enough, one soldier tenses and jerks his head toward a far corner. "Over there," he mutters, stepping toward a collapsed scaffolding. The other follows, both shining their lights. While they're distracted, Courier squeezes Silas's hand and mouths, "Run." They dart out from their cover, crouched low, darting across the room behind a maze of half-toppled crates. Every nerve screams at Silas to move faster. He stifles the urge to breathe too loudly as they slip through a warped door into the corridor beyond. Once they're safely out of earshot, they slow their pace, pressing themselves into a recessed alcove to catch their breath. Silas can feel his heart thrashing. Courier rests her head briefly against the wall, eyes shut as she wrestles with the aftermath of projecting such intense emotional signals. "You all right?" he mouths, brushing a few strands of white hair back from her face. She nods, visibly strained but determined. Her quiet resilience tugs at something inside him he's tried to keep dormant, an unfamiliar desire to protect someone else as fiercely as he protects himself. They refocus. With the converter and power cell in hand, they retrace their steps to the control room where they first attempted to power the transmitter. The route is hazardous now that patrols roam the corridors, so they pick a winding path, hugging walls and ducking behind every piece of cover. Despite the urgency, Silas finds his eyes drifting to Courier whenever they pause. The tension in her posture, the set of her jaw. He's never encountered someone so attuned to others, someone who can feel not just his fear but the flickers of hope he tries to suppress. It terrifies him. Yet it also draws him in like a gravitational pull he can't resist. At last they reach the control room. The faint glow of the console still lingers, untouched since the scouts were called away. Courier nods at Silas, silently urging him to complete the repairs. He kneels, prying open a side panel, carefully installing the battery and converter. Sparks jump from frayed wires. A panel overhead rattles, threatening to break loose, but he manages to keep his focus, bridging the final connections. The console lights sputter, then brighten. Courier inhales sharply, scanning the corridors for any sign of militia returning. Silas reboots the transmitter interface, tapping at ancient keys that respond sluggishly. "Come on," he mutters, every second seeming an eternity. Finally, a status bar crawls across the screen. He glances at her, eyes alight with nervous anticipation. "If this works," he whispers, "we might be able to send a signal off-world. Maybe someone will come to help us break the militia's hold." She sets a gentle hand on his shoulder, her own anxiety pulsing in the space between them. It's a fragile hope, but it's the best chance they have. The power hum intensifies and the transmitter's main console flickers to life. A faint beep indicates readiness. Silas exhales a shaky laugh. Courier's lips curve into a relieved smile. They exchange a look that radiates cautious triumph. Their reprieve, however, is cut short by shouting echoing through the halls. The militia has discovered something amiss. Time is running out. Silas steels himself, determined to send a distress call before they're forced to flee. Counterattack braces near the door, ready to defend him if the enemy arrives. Silas's fingers race across the grimy console, inputting a distress frequency he hopes might still be monitored. Counterattack positions herself by the doorway, her senses alert to echoing boots and shouted orders. The console crackles, bringing up a static-laced channel. Silas speaks low but urgently, transmitting coordinates and a plea for assistance against hostile militia forces. A spasm of doubt seizes him. What if no one hears, or worse, what if the militia intercepts it first? But there's no time for second-guessing. They need an ally or at least a distraction. He finishes and stands, sweat beading along his temples. "Signal's out," he whispers. "We have to move." Counterattack nods, glancing down the corridor. The pounding footsteps grow louder. Any second now, the enemy might burst in. They slip out, hugging the wall, trying to retrace a path back through the twisting corridors. It's a gamble. The militia may have sealed off every exit by now. As they hurry, Silas catches Counterattack's wrist. "Wait," he breathes, pulling her behind a half-collapsed divider. They crouch, hearing rough voices nearby. He leans in, almost pressing against her, his heart slamming in his ribs. She meets his gaze, eyes reflecting the dim flicker of overhead lights. Neither speaks, but the sense of closeness is palpable. Each breath is a testament to the fragility of this alliance, and the startling warmth forming beneath all the urgency. A group of militia men barrels past, not spotting them. When their footsteps recede, Counterattack peers around the corner. "All clear," she murmurs. They continue, weaving through fallen beams and battered crates. Soon they reach a corridor opening onto an external catwalk. Harsh sunlight dazzles their eyes. Below, the yard is strewn with rusted scrap. Broken towers loom like sentinels. They see no immediate guards, so they decide to risk crossing the catwalk. Halfway across, a shout from behind. A single militia soldier, gun raised. He fires. Sparks fly off the metal railing. They flatten themselves, hearts racing. Silas fumbles for his own blaster, returning fire in short bursts that ricochet harmlessly off the soldier's cover. The catwalk trembles with each shot. Counterattack tenses, scanning for a way out. "That door," she hisses, pointing to a sealed hatch on the far side. If they reach it, maybe they can slip into another building. But the soldier's vantage point makes crossing lethal. Counterattack's jaw sets. She inhales, tapping into that empathic ability again. Silas notices a faint shimmer run through the marbled lines on her arm. Suddenly, the soldier flinches. His expression contorts in confusion or alarm, as though grappling with a wave of disorienting emotion. He staggers back, lowering his rifle. In that split second, Silas seizes Counterattack's hand and they sprint the remaining distance. They reach the hatch, jammed with rust. Silas throws his weight against it while Counterattack tries to pry the handle. Grit screeches in protest. A stray bullet whizzes overhead, jolting them with panic. At last the door budges and they tumble inside. The corridor behind the hatch is dim and stale-smelling, but for now it's cover. They slide the rusted panel shut, jamming it with a broken pipe. Silas leans against the wall, breathing hard, adrenaline still boiling in his veins. Counterattack trembles, head lowered as she recovers from projecting such a strong psychic distortion. He takes her hand gently. "Are you okay?" She nods, shoulders tense. "It drains me," she admits in a strained whisper. "Strong minds can resist and it becomes a struggle, like forcing my own emotions onto them, but we had no choice." He softens, brushing a thumb over her knuckles. "I get it," he says. "Thank you." She looks at him, exhaustion warring with relief, then forces a weary smile. In that moment, a shared sense of vulnerability flickers between them, a feeling that the other is all they can rely on. His chest tightens in a way that isn't just fear. He's never known someone who risks so much for him, not since the day everything fell apart back home. Yet here she is, battered but unbroken, still looking at him with something more than survival in her eyes. They continue deeper into the facility, searching for a place to plan their next move. Several corridors later, they find a small control room that appears intact but offline. The window overlooks a portion of the outpost courtyard. No militia are visible at the moment, though distant engine noises echo beyond the walls. Silas checks the battered console, confirming it's dead. Fine with him since they only need a respite. Courier collapses against a panel, taking slow, deliberate breaths to steady her mind. Silas kneels beside her, his voice is hushed. "We can't stay long," he says. "They'll sweep the area again." She nods, but her gaze flicks up, heavy with concern. "We broadcast our coordinates. There's a chance someone might respond, unless the militia blocks the signal." He tries to offer some hope. Even if it's jammed, an off-worlder might still detect a partial SOS, if we can hold out. But the half-finished sentence lingers, incomplete. The notion of relying on strangers to swoop in feels hollow. He's always believed help is never guaranteed. He rummages in his pack, offering her a canteen. She takes a long sip, then passes it back. The reality of their situation weighs on them. Even if reinforcements arrive, they still must deal with the militia controlling the planet's only safe launch route. So far, they've been lucky to evade capture. But luck is fickle, and the outpost is crawling with hostiles. Silas lets out a slow exhale, trying to think. If we cause enough disruption, maybe sabotage their vehicles, we could reduce their hold on the port, then we slip away. He isn't sure if it's a solid plan or desperation. Courier seems pensive. Sabotaging them might work, she agrees, but it's risky. They have the numbers, and we don't even know where their main force is stationed. I do know of a hidden pathway leading into an older section of the port, ancient tunnels from centuries back. If we could navigate them and emerge close to the militia's command post, we might disrupt their operations from the inside. Silas raises an eyebrow. "You've been there," she shakes her head. "I've only heard stories about my ancestors' infrastructure." But the entrance to those tunnels might lie beyond the outpost in the deeper canyons. He closes his eyes, weighing options. Either they hunker down, hoping help arrives in time, or they attempt a direct infiltration with almost no backup. Neither choice is appealing, yet the second offers at least a measure of agency. He glances at Courier. Her empathy must be keenly registering his doubts because she places a hand on his shoulder. "We'll decide together," she says softly. There's warmth in her voice, a subtle shift from mere cooperation to genuine partnership. He hesitates, then nods. "All right," he murmurs. "Let's try these tunnels, but first we need to get out of here without drawing attention." A wry smirk tugs at his mouth. "That means we should be stealthy, which clearly isn't my best trait." Courier's lips quirk, as though amused by his attempt at levity. "We'll manage," she answers. Footsteps echo in the distance, reminding them that time is short. Rising, they brace themselves for another harrowing push through the corridors. Each shares a silent resolve. Trusting each other has become less of a necessity and more a desire. Whatever happens, they're in it together, bound by a tenuous alliance that feels more crucial with every passing moment. They exchange one last look of mutual reassurance, then slip out of the room, determined to find a way to the ancient tunnels, and the hope of finally breaking free. They move through the ruined corridors as quietly as possible, guided by Courier's intuitive sense of approaching danger. Every few steps, Silas checks the readings on his handheld scanner, hoping to locate the outpost's exit. The air grows stale, thick with the lingering echoes of conflict. Now and then, distant gunfire ripples through the halls. Courier's features remain tense, her empathic awareness undoubtedly picking up the fear and aggression swirling around them. Silas fights a growing anxiety of his own. He knows they're vulnerable, a single misstep away from capture or worse. They finally slip through a half-collapsed bay door, spilling out onto a ledge overlooking a craggy gorge. Jagged rock formations bristle below like teeth. The sunlight here is softer, filtered by low-hanging clouds. From this vantage, they can see the outpost's eastern perimeter. Several militia vehicles are parked near a barricade, soldiers standing guard. Courier nods in that direction. "They've blocked the direct route," she whispers. "We'll need to go around." Silas surveys the cliffside. There might be a path over those rocks leading down to the canyon floor. "We can circle back toward the deeper canyons you mentioned." They make their way along a precarious ridge, gripping weathered stone for balance. Loose gravel cascades beneath their feet. Silas notices Couria's brow furrow with concern, and he wonders if she's sensing the emotional turmoil from the soldiers behind them, or if it's fear for what lies ahead. After a tense descent, they reach the canyon floor. It's eerily quiet here, the towering walls blotting out much of the sunlight. Pale vines cling to the rocky surface, giving off faint bioluminescent glows that pulse when Courier steps near. Silas finds the effect both beautiful and unsettling, a reminder of her bond with this place. They press deeper, the air turning cool and damp. In places, the canyon narrows so much they have to squeeze past jagged outcroppings. Silas's scanner picks up traces of subterranean cavities, reinforcing the idea that tunnels might lie nearby. Yet a prickling apprehension gnaws at him. So far, they've been lucky to evade the militia, but they're hardly safe. He pauses to adjust his scanner's range, attempting a more precise reading. Courier stands beside him, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. "I sense something ahead," she murmurs. "Not militia, something else." They continue, slipping into a natural passage that twists below the canyon floor. The faint luminescent plants guide them, illuminating algae-streaked walls. Water drips from overhead, echoing off the stone. The path ends at a wide, arched opening carved with ancient symbols. Courier catches her breath. "These markings, they're from my ancestors' language. It's older than most dialects in use now." She runs her fingertips over the carved glyphs, and the silver marbling on her arms flares in response. Silas stands beside her, scanning the walls in awe. "This must be one of the entrances," she whispers, voice trembling with a mix of reverence and apprehension. They step inside, the chamber sloping sharply downward. Unlike the outpost, this place feels alive, the walls pulsing with hidden energy. Strands of glowing moss coil around carved pillars, while faint rivulets of water run across the floor. Courier moves reverently, as though each step is a communion with her lost heritage. Silas follows, resisting the urge to speak, aware that this space deserves a certain quiet respect. Yet the silence only heightens his awareness of her presence, the gentle sound of her breathing, the graceful way she touches stone. They reach a smoother section of tunnel, its ceiling supported by arched struts that glimmer faintly with embedded crystals. Here they pause to rest, listening for any sign of pursuit. The darkness embraces them, but neither moves away. Silas sets his scanner aside. His gaze falls on Courier, noticing the fine sheen of perspiration on her indigo skin, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she recovers from the strain of using her empathic gifts. "You risked a lot back there," he says quietly, recalling how she used her powers to manipulate the soldier's mind. "I know what it feels like to push yourself past your limits." She turns to face him, golden eyes reflecting the faint glow of the crystals. "Sometimes," she replies softly, "there's no other choice. I can't stand by while they tear this place apart, and I can't let you be harmed either." Her confession hangs in the air. Silas's throat tightens. He steps closer, running a thumb gently over the ridged line of her cheekbone. "I didn't realize you worried about me that much," he murmurs. She lets out a shaky breath. "I can feel more than just your fear, Silas. I sense your hopes, your regrets, and in spite of everything, you keep fighting." Her voice drops. That kind of resolve, it draws me in. Her words ignite a warmth that flutters through his chest. I'm afraid, he admits, hearing the tremor in his tone, but I don't want to lose what little we have. I know it sounds ridiculous, but trusting you feels right. She tilts her head, her white hair slipping across her shoulder in a graceful arc. He sees a flicker of vulnerability there, as if she too is on the brink of something unfamiliar. Slowly, she places her hand atop his, pressing his palm to her cheek. The contact resonates with an intensity that makes him breathless. Caution wars with longing in both their expressions, but the fragile space they occupy pushes them beyond caution. Silas leans in, and she meets him halfway. Their foreheads touch, a gesture that in her culture symbolizes raw emotional connection. He closes his eyes, inhaling her faint, earthy scent. She slips her arms around his waist, drawing him closer until the tension in the air sizzles with unspoken desire. They exchange a tentative kiss, the warmth of it cutting through the damp chill of the tunnel. It's a question and an answer all at once, an admission that they are done running from the pull between them. Time seems to blur. They cling to each other, unsure how long they remain like that, savoring the solace this bond offers. When at last they break apart, breath mingling in the dimly lit space, a hush settles over them. The danger remains, but so does the precious realization that, in this moment, they choose each other. She cups his face gently, her fingertips tracing the rough edge of his scar. He lets out a soft laugh, half astonished, half grateful. I don't know how long we have, he whispers. But I'm glad it's with you. She presses closer, resting her head against his chest, and a quiet shiver runs through them both. He senses there's more between them now, something deeper, fueled by the adversity they've faced side by side. She slides her hand down his arm, fingers interlacing with his. Her voice trembles just slightly. Let's keep moving, she says. We'll need to find a secure spot before we try to rest again. He knows she means more than simple security. She's offering a chance to explore what has begun to spark between them. Swallowing the knot of hope in his throat, he nods. They gather their belongings, stepping deeper into the ancient corridors. Though they walk into darkness, there's a newfound glow in their expressions, an unspoken commitment forged by shared danger and vulnerability. The luminescent vines guide them onward, each step echoing the quiet union forming between two souls who, until recently, believed trust was a luxury they could never afford. They walk deeper into the subterranean passage, stepping around shallow pools where water seeps through cracks in the rock. The gentle glow of moss and vines creates a shifting tapestry of light that seems to pulse in response to Kuria's presence. Silas notes how her expression has changed since their kiss. She carries a quiet resolve, as though determined to face every challenge at his side. His own chest feels lighter, buoyed by the realization that he isn't alone in this fight or in the tangled realm of his emotions. As they descend a gentle slope, the tunnel widens into a cavern that dwarfs the passages behind them. Massive columns of carved stone support a vaulted ceiling strewn with bioluminescent crystals. The air is cool, tinged with a sweet, floral scent. For a moment neither speaks, they simply take in the sight. At the far end of the cavern stands an ornate structure, a circular dais framed by pillars etched with spiraling symbols. Faint trails of phosphorescent fungi creep along the platform's edges. Kuria approaches it slowly, her gaze flicking across the carvings. Silas follows at her side, scanning with the device strapped to his arm. Something in the dais resonates with his scanner, a cluster of reading spikes, indicating there's an unusual mineral presence beneath. He frowns. "This is stronger than anything I've picked up before," he murmurs. Kuria places a hand on one of the pillars, and the silver patterns across her skin shimmer in response. A soft vibration thrums through the air, like a half-formed chord. "This place," she says, voice hushed, It was a ceremonial chamber for my ancestors. The mineral you seek was cultivated in these depths long ago. They learned to harness its energy, but they recognized its danger too. She steps onto the dais, trailing her fingers over ancient glyphs. Silas's curiosity stirs, but so does his unease. Danger how? He asks. She hesitates, then answers. It amplifies the emotional frequencies of my species. In the wrong hands, it could become a weapon or a source of unimaginable profit. Her eyes flick to his as if gauging his reaction. It's why the militia wants it. Silas exhales, remembering how important this resource was to his own desperate goals. The knowledge that it might be tied to Couria's heritage jars him. So your ancestors sealed this away, he says, but it's still here, waiting for someone to misuse it. She nods gravely, turning her focus to the swirling lights beneath the stone. I can feel it, she whispers. It's stirring like it senses my presence. If the militia extracts this mineral on a large scale, they could disrupt ecosystems on entire worlds, not just this one. A deep pang of guilt settles in Silas's chest. He's come all this way to claim a piece of that same mineral for personal gain. He wrestles with the conflict, his business, his future, everything riding on a rumor. But the look on Couria's face tells him that this isn't just about a resource. It's her birthright, her people's legacy. He sets a hand on her arm. We'll find a way to protect it, he promises, swallowing hard. I won't help them exploit your world, but I still need something, some way to keep my life afloat. She studies him, empathy radiating from her golden eyes. We can figure that out, she says softly, but only if we stop the militia's plan first. He nods. The tension in his gut doesn't vanish, but her willingness to consider his needs gives him a spark of hope. Together, they circle the dais, searching for clues or tools that might help them. Couria's fingertips glide over a central panel carved with intricate sigils. She presses lightly, and the dais emits a low hum. A hidden compartment slides open, revealing a small orb that glows with the same violet hue as her eyes. She lifts it carefully, hands trembling. An ancestral key, she explains. Legends say it can lock or unlock certain veins of the mineral, controlling how much is released. If the militia gains this knowledge, they'll tear the planet apart to replicate it. Silas can't suppress a shiver. We have to keep it from them. We'll need to move, though. They're still hunting us, and we've already broadcast a signal. Coria nods, slipping the orb into a pouch at her hip. Their next steps echo through the cavern. Just as they near an exit on the opposite side, movement ripples in the darkness beyond. Silas tenses, drawing his blaster. He senses Couria's alertness flare. Some presence is closing in. A hush falls, and then 3 militia scouts emerge from behind a rock formation, rifles at the ready. The lead scouts gaze darts between Silas and Coria, then to the dais. Looks like we found the treasure hunters, he sneers. Drop your weapons. Couria's hand flexes over the orb, but she doesn't attempt her empathic manipulation yet. Silas takes a step forward, heart pounding. We're not here to fight, he says, trying to stall, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. The scout laughs bitterly, leveling his gun. We know exactly what we're dealing with, riches beyond imagination. He waves the muzzle at Coria. Hand over whatever you pulled from that contraption, or we start shooting. The tension spikes, each breath loaded with the risk of violence. Coria looks at Silas, a silent question passing between them. He tightens his grip on the blaster, inhaling once to steady his nerves. Before the scouts can react, Coria unleashes a quick pulse of empathic force, directing it at the lead soldier. The man staggers, mind reeling under the sudden emotional onslaught. Silas seizes the moment, diving behind a column for cover, firing off a shot that forces the other 2 scouts to scatter. Coria sprints across the cavern, seeking a better vantage. The lead scout recovers faster than she expected, wrenching his rifle up and firing wildly, sparks dancing off the carved stone. Silas ducks, cursing under his breath, sending return fire that grazes one scout's leg. The wounded man shouts in pain, retreating behind a stalagmite. The echoes of gunfire batter the once sacred space. Couria's empathic blasts help disorient the soldiers, but she can't maintain them for long without depleting her own strength. The second scout, eyes wild, tosses a small explosive device toward the dais. Silas sees it land near the pillar. A rush of horror crashes through him. It could destroy the entire chamber, including the orb they need. He launches himself forward, ignoring the sting of a bullet that grazes his arm. With a desperate shove, he kicks the explosive toward a corner of the cavern, where it detonates with a deafening roar, throwing up a cloud of dust and shrapnel. Coria uses the confusion to close the distance with the lead scout, who's still reeling from her empathic influence. She delivers a swift, precise strike with the butt of his own rifle, knocking him unconscious. One of the remaining scouts tries to flee, limping from the earlier shot. Silas, panting, keeps his blaster raised. Coria advances on the wounded soldier, eyes cold. "We won't kill you," she says, "but tell your superiors this planet won't be surrendered." The man glares, blood trickling down his thigh. With a strangled curse, he manages a stumbling retreat. Silas drops to one knee, pressing a hand against the shallow graze on his arm. Blood stains his sleeve, but relief washes over him. At least the explosive didn't destroy the dais. Courier rushes to him, concern etched in every line of her face. She rests a hand on his wound, channeling a calming pulse. He grimaces. "I'll live," he mutters, wincing as she applies a makeshift bandage. "We need to get out before reinforcements arrive." They gather themselves, hearts still pounding. The unconscious scout lies sprawled on the cavern floor, the dais scarred from shrapnel. Coria clutches the orb protectively, while Silas steadies his breathing. Every muscle in his body shakes from the rush of adrenaline, and from the dawning reality that this is just the beginning. The militia won't stop. Yet he finds his gaze returning to Coria, a protective warmth surging in his chest. She meets his eyes, and despite the chaos around them, there's an unspoken promise there. They'll see this through together. Clinging to that silent vow, they hurry toward the tunnel exit, the echoes of violence still reverberating in the sacred chamber behind them. They emerge into a winding passage, the sound of trickling water tapering off behind them. Their footsteps echo on damp stone. Silas's arm throbs under its makeshift bandage, and Curia's brow knits each time he winces. She keeps one hand gently pressed against his uninjured arm, guiding him through the tunnel's subtle inclines. Several times, faint tremors skitter through the rock beneath their feet, hinting at the planet's fragile stability. The fight back in the cavern has rattled them both, and the knowledge that the militia won't stop weighs on them like a gathering storm. Eventually, they reach a low opening marked by more of her ancestors' carvings. Mossy roots drape over its threshold, glowing softly. When Coria touches the nearest root, a warm surge of light brightens, revealing a chamber beyond. Unlike the ceremonial hall, this space is snug, almost womb-like, with curved walls lined by smaller crystals. It appears untouched by looters, and no footsteps mar the layer of dust. "This might be a place to rest," Coria murmurs, scanning the area for hidden threats. Silas nods, grateful for any pause in the chaos. They settle near a natural alcove where a tiny trickle of water seeps from the wall into a basin. Coria kneels beside Silas, removing a fresh patch of salve from her pack. The orb rests in a secure pouch at her hip, pulsing faintly in tune with her own heartbeat. He notices it with a curious mixture of awe and unease. Still, his focus shifts quickly when she gently peels back his makeshift bandage. The graze isn't deep, but it's inflamed from the harsh conditions. She applies the salve, her touch cool and soothing. He exhales, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. "I'm sorry," she whispers, voice tinged with guilt. "That wound happened because we had to fight." He catches her hand before she can pull away. "Don't be," he replies, voice rough with lingering adrenaline. "We did what we had to do. You saved us more than once." She holds his gaze, searching for any hint of resentment he might harbor, but finds none. Instead, there's a deeper emotion in his eyes, gratitude edged with a tenderness he's only just beginning to acknowledge. They eat a small ration, sharing sips from a canteen. The air is still, only the drip of water and their breathing breaking the silence. Silas looks around, noticing the swirling patterns carved into the walls. "You know what these symbols mean?" he asks, curiosity masking some of his anxiety. Courea traces a graceful finger over one engraved spiral. "Some are blessings for safety. Others represent the bond between my people and this planet, an acknowledgement that the mineral's power is a shared responsibility. My ancestors believed a true bond would protect both sides." The mention of bonding stirs something in the air between them. Silas shifts, recalling how she had spoken of her people's empathic ties, how intense and permanent they could be. He's no longer frightened of that possibility, yet it's still vast and unfamiliar. She must sense the swirl of emotions within him because she leans closer, placing a gentle hand on his chest. "You're afraid I might expect more than you can give," she murmurs. "But bonding for us isn't about entrapment. It's about walking together, choosing each other in every moment." "I feel your hesitations, but I also feel." Her voice trails off, cheeks darkening with a flush. He covers her hand with his own, heart pounding. "I don't want to lose this connection," he admits. "It's new to me, caring for someone so deeply while everything around us is on the edge. But I'm not backing away." She searches his face, and in that moment, no words are needed. Their breaths mingle and she moves toward him, pressing a tentative kiss to his lips. He returns it, letting the sensation linger, a slow warmth unfurling between them that chases the cold knot of fear from his chest. They lose track of time, slipping into quiet conversation punctuated by shared glances and gentle touches. Eventually, fatigue sets in and Courea shifts to lean against the curved wall, motioning for Silas to do the same. He rests beside her, letting their shoulders press together. Though the threat beyond these walls looms, this pocket of peace feels impossibly precious. She hums softly, her voice harmonizing with the background drip of water, and he recognizes a hint of the old lullaby he once hummed. The melody is changed, interwoven with a plaintive thread of her own. It calms him more than he expects. After a short doze, Silas stirs. She must feel him shift because she whispers, "We can't stay here much longer." He nods. As much as he wants to remain in this hidden chamber, they have to address the looming crisis. "We need a plan," he says quietly, standing to stretch his tired limbs. Courea stands too, her expression sobering. "The militia will be hunting us, and if they secure the dais or uncover other veins, they'll harvest the mineral. We have to stop them or drive them off-world." She glances at the orb. "This ancestral key can help us lock the main veins, preventing further extraction. But to do that, I need access to certain nodes, places in the planet's crust that respond to empathic energy. They're scattered across the region." Silas straightens, the scanner on his arm flickering to life. "I can help find them. If your ancestors left behind these nodes, they might register as anomalies in the geology. Once we seal them, the militia won't get what they want." A flicker of hope lights her eyes. "Then they'll have no reason to stay, especially if we sabotage their gear. But it's going to be dangerous." She hesitates, reading the stubborn determination on his face. "We'll do it together," he says firmly. "I won't let them destroy your world or hurt you." His words come out fiercer than he intended, but she doesn't recoil. Instead, her hand slips into his. "Let's go," she whispers. They gather their belongings, stepping back into the corridor and letting the chamber seal behind them as they brush aside a drape of glowing vines. The path ahead is uncertain, but they have purpose now. Locate and seal the mineral's key sites, thwart the militia's ambitions, and survive. With each step, they rely on both reason and intuition, his methodical scanning, her empathic sense. The tunnels shift, twisting into labyrinthine forks. Now and then, Silas's device pings softly, guiding them toward energy spikes that might correspond to a node. Eventually, they emerge into a broader passage where faint daylight seeps in from a distant exit. The noise of the outside world filters through. Rumbling engines, distant gunfire, a hiss of the wind swirling across the desert. They exchange a grim look. Whatever illusions of safety that cavern offered have dissolved. Out here, the militia holds the advantage of numbers and technology, but they also don't understand the planet the way Kuria does. As they edge toward the exit, they spot a vantage high on a rocky ledge. Climbing it requires careful maneuvering around crumbling stone, but soon they're peering across the desert floor. In the distance, they see the militia's main encampment. Rows of tents, vehicles, and portable turrets form a rough perimeter around a newly dug site, a glaring scar in the sand. Excavation equipment stands near the center, glinting under the blazing suns. A heaviness descends on them both. The militia has already made progress, tearing at the planet's crust to reach the precious resource. Kuria's jaw clenches, and Silas feels her surge of sorrow and anger. "We need to hurry," he murmurs. "If they dig too deep, they could trigger a collapse or unleash something even they can't handle." She tears her gaze from the scene, eyes glimmering with fresh resolve. "You find me those nodes, I'll lock down the veins. Then we'll make sure the militia realizes there's nothing here worth their while, or that it's too dangerous to attempt." They slip back down from the ledge, hearts racing. Though the scale of the task is daunting, they hold fast to the intimacy forged in fear and hope. Each carries the memory of that quiet chamber, the way they clung to each other in a moment of raw honesty. It isn't just about saving the planet or ensuring Silas's future anymore. It's about protecting a bond that sprang from adversity, a fragile connection they'll fight to preserve at all costs. They make their way around a towering ridge of craggy rock, sticking close to the shadows to avoid detection. Every once in a while, they pause so Silas can consult his scanner, searching for the energy fluctuations that might reveal a key node. The wind picks up, carrying stinging grains of purple-tinted sand, and they pull their scarves tighter around their faces. From high above, the twin suns shine with a merciless glare. Kuria shields her eyes, scanning the horizon. She can just make out the hum of distant machinery where the militia continues its excavation. Beneath that mechanical drone, she senses faint emotional echoes: anger, greed, impatience. It's a toxic cloud of tension that sets her own nerves on edge. She reaches back for Silas's hand, giving it a firm squeeze. His mismatched eyes glance down at her, and though they both remain tense, the contact grounds them. They reach a small plateau dotted with resilient scrub plants. Silas lifts the scanner, tapping a series of buttons that extend its range. A faint reading flickers across the screen and he frowns. "It's close," he murmurs, rotating in place as he tries to pinpoint the direction. Kuria watches, pressing a palm to the ground as if listening for an echo in the planet's crust. A moment later she feels it, a subtle vibration, an undercurrent of energy that resonates with her empathic abilities. "It's below us," she whispers, "somewhere beneath this plateau." Silas kneels, brushing aside the loose topsoil and leaning in to get a better reading. Sure enough, the scanner spikes, confirming a subterranean chamber. They search the area, eventually spotting a narrow fissure concealed behind a tangle of scrub. Sand trickles into the opening when Silas clears some debris. The gap looks barely wide enough for a single person to slide through. This has to be one of those hidden nodes, Correa says. But can we even reach it safely? Silas tries to peer into the darkness, adjusting the scanner's light. We'll have to try. If we don't seal this node, the militia might tap it from another angle. He meets her eyes, aware of the risk. I'll go first. He squeezes sideways into the fissure, the rough stone scraping his jacket. A stale rush of air greets him. Correa follows, pressing close so as not to lose contact in the cramped dark. After several grueling moments, the passage widens into a sloping tunnel that plunges deeper under the plateau. Bioluminescent fungi provide sporadic patches of glow, enough to guide them. The air feels charged, like the hush before a thunderstorm, and Correa's heart beats faster in response. Before long, they come upon a space no bigger than a modest chamber. The floor is uneven, with glowing crystals sprouting along a central crevice. A soft purple light emanates from that fissure, pulsing gently in sync with something buried in the rock. Correa inhales slowly, feeling the resonance hum inside her chest. "This is it," she says, voice trembling in awe. The ancestral orb at her hip responds too, faintly flickering in time with the node's energy. She glances at Silas, who watches her with concern. "What do we do?" he asks. She moves toward the center, kneeling beside the largest cluster of crystals. "My ancestors would perform a focusing ritual, channeling empathic energy through a key like this orb to lock or unlock the flow. I'll need to concentrate." Silas instantly scans the walls. "Let's hope it's not guarded. I'll keep watch." Correa nods, pulling out the orb. She sets it against her palm and closes her eyes. Silas notices the silver lines on her skin begin to glow, weaving patterns of light up her arms and across her cheeks. A gentle vibration passes through the chamber, making the crystals chime. Slowly, she releases measured breaths, centering her thoughts on sealing the node so the mineral's essence can't be tapped. At first, the effect is almost soothing. The purple glow within the crevice dims, as if retreating from her empathic command. But then a jolt of energy snaps outward. Correa gasps as if struck by a sudden wave of pain. Her eyes fly open, wide with shock. The orb flickers erratically and the crystals begin to pulse more violently, casting jagged shadows on the walls. Silas rushes to her side, a cold panic rising in his throat. "Correa!" he exclaims, reaching for her. She grips his hand, trembling. "I can sense anger, desperation. It's not just the planet," she whispers, voice tight. "Someone else is trying to tap this node too. Maybe the militia has drilling equipment connected nearby." Another surge of energy flares, causing the cavern to rumble. Small stones rain down. The two of them look up at the creaking rock ceiling, fear slicing through them like a knife. "We have to do this quickly," Silas mutters, steadying her. She nods, swallowing hard. "Help me focus." She presses the orb to the ground, guiding his hands so they overlap hers. He feels a current of warmth flicker beneath his palms, her empathic power mixing with the node's raw energy. "Don't resist," she murmurs, eyes flickering with violet and gold. "Just be with me in this moment." He shuts his eyes, attempting to still the racing of his thoughts. He tries to mirror the calm he's found in her presence before, remembering how her empathy soothed his fear back in the ruined outpost. Beneath his fingertips, he senses the orb's pulsing light. Within his mind, he glimpses flickers of Correa's memories, images of her homeland, a starry sky, a gathering of her people in some distant ceremonial hall. He doesn't understand the details, but the emotional resonance is undeniable. Love, grief, and fierce devotion to protecting what she holds dear. He opens himself as best he can, letting his own emotions flow. Regret for past betrayals, hope for redemption, the affection he feels blossoming toward her. The synergy of their shared feelings converges, channeling through the orb. The crystal's violent pulsing begins to subside. The node's raw light dims from a harsh glow to a gentler, steady shimmer. The cavern trembles once more, then hushes, as though exhaling a long-held breath. Couria's posture relaxes, though she looks drained. A faint sheen of sweat coats her brow. Silas feels as though he's run a marathon. His head spins from the intensity of whatever just passed between them. She offers him a weary smile, her voice a low rasp. It's sealed. The orb in her hand flares one final time, then goes quiet. The node's energy now feels contained, no longer raging. He helps her stand and they lean against each other for support. "We should get out before more tremors hit," he says, scanning the walls for signs of instability. She nods, tucking the orb away. The crystals remain, but their once brilliant glow is dimmer, subdued by the lock she's set. Silas suspects that if the militia tries to breach from another angle, they'll find nothing but inert rock. Still, they have more nodes to seal if the militia has begun to burrow into other locations. They retrace their steps to the cramped fissure. Just as Silas is about to slip through, a distant rumble shakes the tunnel. Dust falls in thin curtains from the ceiling. In the echo of that quake, they hear something that makes their blood run cold. The unmistakable whine of mechanized drills reverberating through the rock, and the muffled thunder of controlled explosions. The militia is accelerating their efforts, likely spurred by the scuffle at the ceremonial chamber. Couria's eyes flare with concern as she presses her palm to the tunnel wall. "The planet's resonating with all this forced extraction," she says, frustration trembling in her voice. "If they crack open too many veins at once, it could destabilize a huge portion of the crust. People could die, militia and innocents alike." Silas sets his jaw. "We need to reach the other nodes faster, or better yet, destroy that drilling operation." He touches the scanner on his arm. There might be a large concentration of nodes in a single region. If we can seal enough of them, maybe we cut off the militia's entire plan. Coria closes her eyes, calming her jagged emotions. "Let's hurry. We can't allow them to ravage this land any further." Her fingers lace through his, and despite the gravity of the situation, Silas feels that rush of closeness between them again. There's no time to dwell on it, though. Danger presses in from every side, and the only way forward is deeper into the planet's hidden networks or back out into the desert to sabotage the militia's main drilling site. He nods, and they squeeze through the fissure, making their way back toward the plateau's surface. Every echo of distant explosives is another warning that the militia is tightening its grip. Above them, the suns burn in the sky, but for Silas and Coria, the real battle is beneath the earth, where ancient power stirs, awakened by greed, and only a careful merging of empathy and sheer resolve can keep the planet and themselves from crumbling under the strain. They follow the winding path back to the plateau surface, wary of the fresh clouds of dust rolling in from the militia's operation. The landscape seems harsher with each passing hour. The ground shudders beneath them in irregular bursts, a sign that the mining efforts must be intensifying. Coria presses a trembling hand to a fissure in the rock, scanning the planet's pulse, and the muted shock on her face tells Silas all he needs to know. Time is running out. If they don't stop the militia, a catastrophic collapse could be imminent. He helps her up a craggy ledge and they pause at the top to catch their breath. From there, they spot plumes of smoke and dust rising from beyond a series of rolling dunes. Coria narrows her golden eyes, lips drawn tight. "I sense fear, uncertainty. The militia isn't as unified as we thought. Some of them are terrified by the instability they're causing." Silas adjusts the bandage on his arm, the one she treated not long ago. "That might work to our advantage," he mutters. "If we can show them this is a losing battle, maybe we can scatter their forces." They push on, scanning for the second node. According to Curia's ancestral lore, each key site is linked by an underground lattice of empathically reactive minerals, so it shouldn't be far. Her empathy and his scanner eventually lead them to a new outcropping that juts from the ground like a warped spine. A jagged crevice yawns open at its base, warm air blowing out in short, eerie gusts. Silas steadies his scanner, verifying the swirling energy signature below. "This is definitely a node," he says quietly, "and it's more active than the last one." As they slip inside, the narrow passage quickly widens into a chamber that flickers with an otherworldly glow. Unlike the previous node, this place seems partially disturbed. Metal rods and half-assembled equipment litter the entrance, suggesting militia survey teams have already found it. Couria's heart hammers at the thought of what might happen if they left any guards behind. She gestures for Silas to remain alert. He sets his hand on his blaster, scanning corners for signs of movement. The only sound is the trickle of water seeping from hairline cracks, gathering in shallow pools. They spot a large drilling rig jammed into the cavern floor, silent for now, but angled directly at the rock formation that houses the pulsating mineral vein. A battered supply crate stands nearby. Silas inspects it, frowning at the destructive potential of the gear inside. Chemical charges, portable power units. He shakes his head. They were going to blast this place apart. Courier closes her eyes, exhaling a trembling breath. "Let's seal the node now before they come back." Then we destroy the rig. She removes the ancestral orb from her pouch, approaching the faintly glowing fissure in the cavern floor. Silas stands guard, though he can't keep from glancing her way. She whispers something in her own language, pressing the orb against the seam of the rock. Once again, her silver tattoos flare, the air around her stirring with invisible currents of force. A rumbling echoes overhead, small pieces of debris rattling loose. Courier stiffens, feeling resistance in the flow of energy, but she focuses. Silas steadies himself, refusing to let the creeping panic take hold. Her empathic aura collides with the planet's raw power, forging a temporary bridge. At first, the node's glow intensifies, brightening to a near-blinding flash. Then, slowly, it recedes, flickering into a stable, muted radiance. When Courier at last sags back, Silas rushes to her side. "It's sealed," she breathes, voice hoarse. "It resisted more this time. The planet is growing more agitated. We have one more node left, at least, possibly more. But I can sense a primary hub behind all these veins, a final place that ties them all together." She leans on him, her body trembling from the psychic strain. He presses a reassuring hand against her back. "We'll get there. Let's handle this rig first." Working quickly, they rig small charges around the drilling apparatus, scavenging them from the militia's own supply crate. Silas sets a timer, and they scramble out of the chamber. The muffled explosion that follows echoes through the cavern, sending a spray of debris against the rock walls. Dust fills the air, and Courier shields her face from the scattering fragments. Though her heart aches at the damage, she knows it was necessary. With the node sealed and the drill destroyed, the militia's extraction at this site is thwarted. They emerge onto the rocky plain, dusted with debris. Before they can move on, a harsh yell arrests their attention. A patrol of 4 militia soldiers stands nearby, weapons drawn. Their leader, a grim-faced woman with a nasty scar across her brow, levels a rifle at Courier. "Hands where I can see them. You two have caused enough damage." Silas steps forward, voice taut with anger. "You're tearing this planet apart for a resource you barely understand." The soldier sneers, glancing at the scorch marks on the ground where the dust still hangs thick. "We know plenty, enough to know there's profit in this. And you're not leaving here alive." Courier's eyes flick to each soldier, sensing their emotional states, a swirl of greed, desperation, fear. She closes her fists, struggling not to resort to her empathy powers unless absolutely necessary. They're outnumbered, exposed on open terrain. Silas readies his blaster, and tension spikes like a drawn bowstring. Before either side can make a move, the ground lurches violently, almost knocking them all off their feet. A deafening roar rips through the desert, and a geyser of sand erupts in the distance, where the militia's main drilling operation must be accelerating. Everyone stares, momentarily stunned. The lead soldier's face goes pale. She grabs her communicator, barking into it, but the device only crackles with static. Another quake shakes the earth. Silas seizes the chance, firing a warning shot into the sand at the soldier's feet. "We're not your enemy," he shouts over the rumble. "But keep pushing that drill and we'll all be buried alive." Two of the soldiers exchange uncertain glances, fear flickering across their features. Courier steps forward, hands raised. "Leave now," she pleads. "Stop the drilling. It's your only chance to survive." The scarred leader hesitates. One of her men swallows hard, gun shaking in his hands. Another quake rips across the plateau, sending a jagged crack through the ground. "Fall back," the leader finally barks, sounding more desperate than resolute. She waves her troops to retreat, not willing to risk getting sucked into a catastrophic collapse. They scramble away, uncertain whether to treat Silas and Courier as foes or fellow survivors in the face of this unfolding disaster. Silas steadies Courier as she regains balance. "We can't let them regroup," he says, watching the soldiers vanish over a rise. "We've got to find that primary hub. If we don't seal it, their entire operation could cause a collapse that'll destroy everything." She nods, her expression grim. "I can feel the final node's pull. It's deeper than the others, close to where they're drilling. If we can seal it first, we might prevent a planetary catastrophe." They share a breathless moment of resolve. Their hearts pound, but neither backs down. The bond forged between them feels iron-strong in the face of mortal danger. Together, they set off across the trembling landscape, guided by Courier's empathic sense and Silas's scanning tech, determined to halt the militia's final push before it's too late. They press on with no illusions about the peril that awaits them, but each step they take together reaffirms a vow unspoken. Neither will abandon the other, no matter what trials still lurk in the fractured earth ahead. They race against time, the ground beneath them trembling in frequent spasms, as if the planet itself is gasping for relief. A crimson hue bleeds across the sky, tinted by swirling dust whipped up from the deep drilling sites. Every so often, Silas checks his scanner, wincing at the readings. The subterranean lattice is becoming dangerously unstable. Courier senses a near-constant vibration through her empathic awareness, like a distant scream reverberating through stone. They crest a rise to find a stretch of blasted desert riddled with deep trenches and scattered equipment. In the distance, a massive drill rig stands at the heart of a sprawling militia encampment, mechanical arms boring relentlessly into the ground. Dozens of small transport vehicles and weapon emplacements circle the site, but chaos reigns. Soldiers scramble to reinforce buckling barricades, while dust storms spawned by the trembling earth obscure entire sections of the base. Courier grips Silas's arm, her voice taut with worry. "The final node is right beneath that rig. I can feel the pressure building." Silas raises a hand to shield his eyes from blowing sand. "We'll never reach it with that many troops around," he mutters. "We need a distraction, or we convince them this is suicide." He recalls the fear on the soldier's face earlier. If that doubt has spread, some might be ready to turn back. They approach the outskirts of the encampment, weaving between half-collapsed dunes and metal debris. A perimeter guard spots them, but he looks frazzled, gun quivering in his grip. Silas calls out, "Stop the drilling. You're about to trigger a collapse." The guard blinks, torn between orders and his obvious terror. Courier steps forward, voice resonating with empathic encouragement. "We can seal the node if you just let us in. You don't have to die here." The guard's resolve wavers, but a harsh shout cuts through the wind. The militia's second in command, A tall, broad-shouldered man wearing heavy armor charges up with a handful of well-armed soldiers. "Stand down," he barks at the guard, then turns on Silas and Courier. "Enough of this nonsense. We came here for a resource and we're taking it." Another quake tears across the ground, splitting one of the trenches wide open. An entire scaffold collapses with a deafening crash, flinging dust and metal fragments skyward. The second-in-command falters, but his eyes remain fixed on Courier. "Move aside or we'll shoot." Courier stares him down, frustration and sorrow churning within her. Silas adjusts his grip on the blaster, ready for a firefight. But Courier steps forward, letting a wave of empathic energy ripple through the air. It's not enough to subdue the heavily armored men outright, but it slows their trigger fingers, forcing them to blink against confusion and emotion they can't identify. "There won't be anything left to profit from," she says, voice carrying a fervent edge, "if you destroy the entire region. The planet is breaking apart." She gestures at the drill rig in the distance, now swaying ominously. More troops rush to stabilize it, only to be flung back by sudden fissures opening underfoot. For a split second, it looks like some of the soldiers are ready to surrender, fear outpacing their greed. But the second-in-command roars at them, leveling a rifle at Courier. "I won't let a pair of troublemakers cost me millions." He fires a shot that kicks up sand near her feet. Silas lunges, returning fire. The soldiers scatter, bullets whizzing by. Courier drops low, pressing a hand to the quaking earth to keep from falling. Her empathy roars like a living thing, urging her to stop the conflict before it dooms them all. A tremendous roar of collapsing terrain splits the chaos. The drill rig sinks a few meters, listing to one side. Its massive metal supports grinding and shrieking. Screams break out among the militia ranks as they realize the entire site is on the verge of caving in. Courier seizes the moment. She grabs Silas's arm, nodding toward the rig. "We have to get under it. That's where the final node is." He looks at her like she's mad, but he understands there's no choice. They sprint through the swirling dust, ducking stray gunfire as pockets of militia either flee or try futilely to salvage equipment. Near the base of the rig, the ground is a maze of fractured rock and half-buried supports. Steam and smoke hiss from ruptured pipes. It's unbearably hot, the air tinged with acrid fumes. They navigate twisted beams until they find a service hatch that leads beneath the main platform. Silas blasts the lock, and they drop into a claustrophobic crawl space filled with vibrating machinery. Courier clamps a hand over her nose and mouth, eyes watering from the fumes. Below them, a rectangular shaft descends into darkness where the drilling head is partially visible, jammed in the rock. A deep glow pulses at the edges of the machinery, a sure sign the final node is exposed. Clambering onto a metal catwalk, they edge down a set of rungs. The noise is deafening, reverberations pounding through their bones. Courier's markings glimmer with frantic intensity, her empathy flaring as she strains to sense the planet's rhythms through the chaos. When they reach the bottom, they see jagged cracks in the rock, and from these cracks spills a vivid, prismatic sheen, raw mineral energy surging like blood from an open wound. The ancestral orb flares at Courier's hip, reacting so strongly it makes her stagger. Silas grips her shoulder, helping her stay upright. "We have to seal it right now," he shouts over the clamor. Courier nods, breath hitching from the overwhelming force. She presses the orb against the largest fracture, sweat streaming down her indigo face. Her eyes flutter shut, and she focuses with every scrap of will. Silas, recalling how they worked together at the other nodes, places his hands over hers. Together, they channel her empathic power into the orb. The swirling aurora of energy intensifies, then begins to coil inward, like a tide pulling away from the shore. But the rig is badly destabilized, and a tortured groan from above warns of imminent collapse. Metal screeches overhead as the catwalk tears free from its bolts. Silas braces himself, feeling the entire structure tilt. Dust rains down in suffocating clouds. Kureya tries to maintain her focus, but fear spikes through her as the node resists, still roiling with the militia's forced drilling. She gasps, nearly losing the connection. Silas closes his eyes, pushing aside thoughts of the crumbling rig. He pours everything into their bond, the trust, the shared moments of intimacy, the willingness to risk himself for her. He envisions all the hope he carries, for redemption, for a future where he and Kureya aren't running but building something. It seems to awaken a new layer of empathy in her, and she locks onto the orb with renewed resolve. Light explodes around them, bathing the entire cavity in shimmering violet and gold. The rock trembles violently, then the glow condenses, collapsing into the node in a final rush. When it fades, the fractures appear less severe, sealed by an iridescent sheen. The raw energy vanishes, leaving only the faint glimmer of residual crystals. Kureya staggers, panting, tears streaking her cheeks. "It's done," she whispers. An instant later, the overhead rig crashes into the chamber, beams snapping in a screech of metal. Silas grabs Kureya, diving behind a jut of rock as debris rains down. They cower together, waiting for the final blow, but the sealed node holds firm. The partial collapse rips apart the machinery but leaves a pocket of space around them. Dust fills their lungs and the darkness is nearly absolute. Then, after what feels like an eternity, the tremors slow. The swirling energies recede, the planet's pulse calming. Kureya clutches Silas, heart hammering in her chest. He coughs, blinking grit from his eyes. "We're alive," he manages, voice ragged. They hear distant shouts, muffled under the wreckage. The militia is in disarray and the planet no longer rages with lethal fury. Kureya leans into him, relief flooding through her. Their bond stands, forged in the crucible of danger. They carefully pick their way through the wreckage, eventually finding a path back to the surface. The encampment is in ruins. Many of the militia have fled. A few remain, dazed, attempting to salvage supplies. Some barely acknowledge Silas and Kureya as they pass. The sealed nodes have taken the greatest prize off the table, rendering the entire operation pointless. Without the planet's abundant energy to exploit, all that remains is twisted metal and battered dreams of profit. The second in command, bloodied and limping, glares at them as they emerge from under the collapsed rig. He starts to raise a weapon, but the ground gives another warning jolt and he drops it, stumbling back. His hatred doesn't matter now. He knows there's nothing left to gain. Silas helps Kureya away from the wreckage, glancing warily at the militiaman, who finally just spits in disgust and staggers off, cursing under his breath. They reach a dune that overlooks the damaged site. The sun has begun to set, bathing the desert in a bruised purple glow. In the distance, the flicker of possible rescue lights catches Silas's eye. Perhaps the distress signal they sent has finally reached someone willing to help. Kureya exhales, leaning against his shoulder. He wraps an arm around her, feeling a surge of exhaustion and relief all at once. She rests a trembling hand on his chest. "We did it," she whispers, eyes brimming with unspoken emotion. "We saved the planet from collapse." He turns to look at her, the swirling dust drifting behind them, and each other. He thinks of everything that's happened, crashes, betrayals, the forging of a bond he never thought possible. A warmth blossoms in his chest that has nothing to do with the scorching desert wind. Kureya draws him close, their foreheads touching in that intimate gesture. "What happens now?" she asks, voice trembling with both hope and uncertainty. Silas cups her face gently, brushing sand from her cheek. "Whatever we choose," he murmurs. "We can leave this place together, find a new path. If your people need you, I'll help. If you want to explore the stars, I have a ship. Well, I used to, but I'll get another. We'll rebuild, just together." Tears slip down her indigo skin and she nods, letting out a shaky laugh. I never thought I'd bond with an outsider, but now I can't imagine walking away. She closes her eyes, and a final quake ripples through the sands, gentler this time, like the planet's sigh of relief. Their arms encircle each other, a silent promise that they will face whatever comes next as one. They linger on that dune as the evening light fades, watching the battered encampment below. The militia will depart, forced to confront their losses and the reality that the planet's treasures are locked away. The planet itself still stands, scarred but unbroken. And in the midst of that scarred landscape, two souls, once adrift, have found a bond stronger than fear or greed. It's a love neither expected but both have fought to protect, one that has already changed them in ways they can't fully measure. With the final glow of dusk reflecting in their eyes, Silas and Courier turn from the wreckage. Side by side, they make their way across the shifting sands, toward the faint signal of a rescue beacon and a future they will define together. The last notes of the day's heat whisper across their skin, but within them burns a steadier warmth. No cliffhangers remain. Their path is as certain as the gentle press of their joined hands, an ending that for them is also a beginning, free from the chains of a broken past. They trudge through the twilight until they crest another rise, where they find remnants of a small transport craft responding to their distress call. The pilot stands at the open ramp, scanning the horizon with cautious curiosity. Around them, the wind carries a blend of cooling desert air and the lingering scent of machine oil from the ravaged encampment. Silas and Courier exchange glances, a subtle current of emotion passing between them as they approach. The pilot waves them over. Heard your signal, didn't expect to find survivors. Silas helps Courier aboard first, ensuring her balance on the ramp. Her face is drawn from exhaustion, and he notices how her silver markings have dimmed from all the empathic strain. Nonetheless, her posture straightens when she looks back at him, determination glinting in her golden eyes. He's reminded again that she isn't just a survivor but a guardian of a world's secrets. They step inside the craft's modest interior, taking in the cramped space. Silas secures the door behind them, a small but reassuring clang sealing off the desert wind. The pilot, a middle-aged woman with deep-set eyes, waits for them to settle on a bench. "Name's Raleigh," she says, flicking a switch that powers up the instrument panel. "I got your message. Figured somebody out there needed a lift. You two look like you've been through a war." Courier manages a faint smile. "In many ways we have." Raleigh eyes the battered gear, the dust-streaked clothes, Silas's bandaged arm. "I can get you to the nearest station a few hours away. The local authority might want a report, especially if the militia was up to no good." Silas and Courier exchange a silent conversation. Finally, Silas speaks. "We'll give our statement, but the militia won't be a threat much longer. They can't extract anything anymore. That planet's off-limits to them." Raleigh arches a brow, curiosity plain on her face, but she doesn't press. Instead, she powers the engines and the transport rattles as it lifts off the ground. Through the small viewport, Silas and Courier watch the desert unfold beneath them. The rig lies in mangled pieces, scattered across a patchwork of collapsed trenches. Faint specks of fleeing militia vehicles leave dusty trails in the growing darkness. The planet's surface glimmers under the rising moons, as though relieved to be left in peace. Courier slips her hand into Silas's, resting her head against his shoulder. He lets out a weary breath, leaning back against the cool metal wall of the cabin. Raleigh steers them through the upper atmosphere, and soon the harsh sands give way to the tranquil glow of stars. In that quiet, Silas replays the events in his mind, his lonely arrival, the chance meeting with Courier, the swirling rush of conflict and desire, the sacrifices they made to preserve something larger than themselves. His chest tightens with gratitude and an odd nostalgia, even though it all happened so fast. "You'll be safe now," Raleigh says over her shoulder. "The station's under planetary authority. They don't take kindly to rogue militias." Courier nods, exhaustion tugging at her eyelids. "Thank you," she murmurs, voice thick. Silas gives her fingers a gentle squeeze, noticing how she leans into him for warmth. For all her empathy and resilience, she needs rest just as much as he does. Hours later, they touch down on a simple landing pad attached to a Spartan station dome. A few security personnel wait outside, likely alerted by Raleigh's calm. Silas and Courier step off the craft onto stable ground, the station's exterior lights flickering across their dust-stained clothes. Raleigh salutes them, offering a curt nod before moving to unload some supplies. "Good luck. Hope you two find what you're looking for." Inside the station, the air is filtered and cool, a stark contrast to the desert's blistering heat. A tired clerk in a control booth records their arrival. They answer basic questions, giving a brief account of the militia's activities without revealing the full cosmic secret behind the planet's empathic mineral. The clerk shakes her head in dismay, but says reinforcements will ensure the militia doesn't regain a foothold. After that, they find a small medical bay where Courier checks Silas's arm more thoroughly, applying a fresh layer of healing salve. A pang of warmth blossoms between them each time their eyes meet. He's struck by how natural it feels to have her fussing over him, to accept her care. When she finishes, he gently lifts her chin, brushing away a stray strand of white hair. "Your turn," he says, voice tinged with concern. "You've overused your empathic gifts. Let's see if they can get you some rest." One of the med techs offers Courier a bed in a quiet corner. She thanks him softly. As she settles, Silas slides a stool next to her, unwilling to be far from her side. She looks up, eyes half-lidded with fatigue. "Everything feels unreal," she murmurs. "Did we really seal all those nodes? Is the planet truly safe?" He takes her hand, pressing it against his heart. "We stopped them. You felt it, right? The planet's calmer now." A grateful, shaky breath escapes her. "Yes," she whispers, letting her eyes close. "Thank you for believing in me." Silas's chest tightens with emotion. "Thank you for letting me in." He strokes her hair gently until her breathing steadies and she drifts into a much-needed sleep. For a while, he stays at her side, thoughts drifting. He remembers how fiercely he guarded himself before, how he assumed everyone would betray him eventually. Yet here he sits, heart laid bare, confident that she's changed him forever. The swirl of events that led him here, crashed ship, rumors of minerals, a fateful alliance, has produced something more precious than any resource. It's a bond he never saw coming. In the following days, they recover at the station. Security forces confirm that the militia withdrew, pursued by planetary patrols. Reports filter in that the desert is stabilizing. No major quakes since the rig's collapse. No more sightings of unauthorized drilling crews. Word spreads that the planet simply isn't profitable anymore. Other corporate interests lose interest, and the region falls back into relative obscurity. Courier, regaining her strength, helps Silas plan for the future. "We can salvage parts from the militia's abandoned vehicles," she suggests one evening, leaning against him in the station's common area. "Rebuild a vessel that'll let us travel, or the planet's authorities might reward us once they realize what we prevented." He wraps an arm around her, humming a snippet of that lullaby under his breath. "Whatever we do it together. My old life, my business, it all seems secondary now. I just want to build something real starting with you." She turns to him, eyes shining. "My culture's bond ceremony was meant to be a lifelong pledge. I never thought I'd experience it with an off-worlder, but I already feel bound to you more deeply than any ritual could convey." He presses a tender kiss to her forehead, heart fluttering with a gentle certainty. In that moment, The swirling galaxy beyond the station walls feels open, welcoming them. No longer do they stand as lone survivors, they are partners with a shared destiny. On their last night at the station, they walk together under artificial lights that mimic a sunset sky. The hum of the station's machines fades into a comforting background thrum. Courier leans into Sila's and he draws her close, their steps unhurried. When they reach a window overlooking the stark desert horizon, they pause. Outside, a blanket of stars stretches above the planet they saved. She slips her hand into his and they share a quiet smile. He turns to her, voice low. "This is our last chance to change our minds. Are you sure you're ready to leave this place?" She tilts her head thoughtfully. "It was never truly my home, just a sanctuary I tried to protect. I'll always be connected to it, but my path lies beyond." She glances at him. "With you." They share a final, deep kiss beneath the glow of the fall sunset, a silent vow that the love they forged in crisis is the love they carry forward, on this planet, among the stars, or wherever their journey leads. And as their lips part, there's no lingering doubt, no unspoken fear. The conflict is resolved, the planet safe, and the two of them stand ready to carve out a life that holds room for both of their dreams. The sense of completion fills the space between them, final and whole, leaving no question of what might come next. Whatever it is, they face it together.